Welcome to the Well Off Podcast, where the goal is to motivate, inspire, and share success principles. I'm your host, George Masri. On this episode, I interviewed Jon Tenbrinke from Blackjack Contracting. I'm sure a lot of you guys know him if you've been involved in any of the real estate groups, some of the monthly meetups. Blackjack Contracting is usually there. But anyway, on this episode, we talked about several things, including getting a permit on your renovation jobs, why it's important to do so, or what situations are you able to avoid potentially getting a permit, what's some of the work that you can do without needing one. We talked about why it's important to get a GC, or also the benefits of having one, how it can potentially save you some time, that kind of thing. We discussed renovation costs, material costs, and labor costs, and what's been happening lately. As a lot of you guys know, many people have been getting their renovations done lately during COVID because people were stuck at home. So that not only caused not only did the material prices go up, but also labor costs went up because there were more people that were busier and had less time to quote jobs and do jobs and that kind of thing. And finally, we talked about underpinning and then also contracts. So what to look out for when you're signing a contract with a contractor. What are some of the things that you could do to protect yourself, and what should you expect? I know you're going to enjoy this episode. If you do, make sure to leave us a 5-star review on the Apple Podcast platform. Make sure to share this with a friend or family member. I think a lot of people can benefit from learning more about working with contractors. I appreciate all your support. Thank you, and I look forward to connecting with you guys. You can do so by visiting welloff.ca or reaching out to me on Instagram, welloffx. All right, I'm here with Jon Tenbrinke from Blackjack. A lot of you guys probably know him if you're already investing. I know he works with a ton of investors. Jon, I know it was a long drive here. Thank you for coming by today.
Well, thank you for having me.
I like to start off by asking about your childhood. So
Sure.
Tell me about where you grew up and just maybe one or two memories that really stick out for you.
Sure. So I grew up in a small town called Smithville, which is in Niagara region. It's up the hill. It had a population of 6,000. I spent most of my childhood playing hockey or baseball or all the small towns. It was one of those towns where you're at 6 years old, you could ride your bike anywhere in town as long as you got home by the dinner light. Mm-hmm. So we had a nice childhood. We lived in a town, and then we eventually moved up to a country property. Well, the house wasn't much, but it was the funnest time. You can get in a lot of trouble without getting in trouble.
Yeah. Was it a country home or?
Yeah, we originally lived in the town, and then we eventually, before we moved out of Smithville, we lived in a country home that had like 7 acres, and we were middle of nowhere. So between having quads and fires, and we had a lot of things that we would have got in trouble if we were in town.
I actually went to visit a place in Port Coburn recently where it was a country home. He said that the home was moved, so it was picked up off of the original foundation. Yep. And I think he said it was moved twice because it was built in the 1800s. So I found that interesting.
Actually, my grandmother lived in Port Coburn, so I spent a lot of time there too. All those little small towns, they were the best.
Yeah.
I hate cities.
Okay, so tell me a bit about Blackjack. What do you guys do? Just kind of give us a brief overview.
Sure. So most people know, but I started out as an electrical contractor, and then we eventually made a bet with somebody and started this contracting business. And we started off doing duplex conversions just because that was the first thing that was available. It wasn't by design. And we've done pretty much nothing but that since, except for some, general burr renovations. But, we've done 230-something duplex conversions since 2017. It's kind of been our thing. It's not the only thing we do, but that's what we're really good at. So it's been a lot of fun.
Okay, so how did this... I know you said it was kind of like a little bet, but what made you want to get into giving up kind of the electrical side and getting into more of the contracting?
So it was more just a challenge. I became a master electrician when I was 25 years old, so I had kind of done everything really fast and really early. So it was just another challenge because I always loved construction in general, right? It was more of an ego thing, but you know what? So I had a business partner named Bill, and he owns his own little company out in Chatham now. We decided to start. He was working for electrical with me, and we decided to do this, and then so we took on one project, and it kind of one here, one there, and eventually it took right off to the point where we've done 30 at one time. I mean, so it's been fun, and but I mean, the nice thing about construction is that there's something new and challenging all the time. I feel like for what I was doing in electrical, I kind of mastered that. I think I was more residential, light commercial, And so it was just because I get bored too easy. That's the problem.
Yeah. How many people do you have on your crew now?
So we have 15 internal staff, and I think we have like 30 or 40 sets of subcontractors during that thing. So it's been an interesting balance between in-house employees and subcontractors to see what the best mix is. Mm-hmm. At one point we had like 35, and it was just too much. And
yeah.
And quality and production and all that stuff. It's a very delicate balance in a construction company. So we're about 15 people now, and right now we can actually do more with the 15 than we could do with the 35. So it's been really good.
I know that's one of the challenges that contractors face when they're growing, and because everybody needs a good contractor. When you start to grow, you realize that you don't have enough crew, but you don't have the time necessarily to go out and start training people and bringing people on board and doing all that, or at least that's how some people feel. Yeah. How do you manage to continue to grow and make sure that the quality of work is still good and all that other stuff?
So, you know what, we found out that it was training, as you're right, training young guys and training crews is really difficult, especially nowadays, especially in just general construction. In like electrical, for example, where those people want to be there. Construction kind of has a class sometimes that just want a paycheck, right? So it's very hard to decipher that. What we found is actually having better management. Excuse me, better management was the key to doing more. So like better project management, better kind of organized systems that way, so you can do a lot more. And that way you can use more subcontractors who are already specialized in what they do. And have a specific set of people on our staff that can do very specific things that are hard to find subcontractors for, like framing and structure guys. Those are the ones that are actually really difficult to find for renovation. You can buy builder ones, but like renovations, and then specialty like window cuts and doors and stuff like that. We found that having our own guys for that was better. But better project management overall, and better like down the line planning has been a lot better than actually hiring more people.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's the 15 people you said that you have. They're the ones that are kind of managing the back end.
So we have some field employees. We have a group right now of 6 field employees that actually go out and do jobs, but they're the best of the best that we've had, and we've kept them. And then we also have 3 or 4 project managers and material guys. So our project managers now are doing procurement and doing the actual planning, talking to the customers, making sure subs are getting inspections. And I found an awesome woman named Daryl, and she just took over, and she's been a godsend. I used to have to do it all myself, and she's kind of taken that over, so it's been great. And then we have some admin people, obviously, to take care of the back end stuff, because there's a lot of paperwork in contracting, believe it or not. And then estimating and sales and all that stuff.
Okay, cool. There's a lot to cover, but I guess one of my questions, because I'm going to start diving into these questions that I have, why is it important for people? I know you guys do this, like applying for permits. Some people will start construction and they won't necessarily get permits or whatever. Why do you think that it's important to go with the permits?
Well, I mean, there's a time and a place where it's just not worth getting a permit, and we're all guilty of it. But there's just too many problems and too many risks, and I think your property's worth more when you do it right the first place. I just had a situation with a customer, and he's an awesome guy, but he's just had a bad side of luck, because everybody knows I'm not a big fan of St. Catharines because they're very difficult. But he had to go through a construction process with a set of permits that he didn't like because he failed a minor variance because of a neighbor. Long story short, after the job was done, he changed it. And then all of a sudden, he got a complaint call 3 months later. Yeah. Now they want to come check out the property after the property's closed. So now this guy's in a world of trouble. And I have no real easy answer for him. Not to mention is, like, if you do get caught, you're not always going to get caught, but more likely you will eventually. You're talking of losing tenants, shutting down a job, months of permits and drawings, and, potential fines and all that. It's just not worth it. Not to mention, like, again, like illegal, like on a duplex, that's what we're kind of talking about here, is just like your property's worth X amount more. People want the legal status. You don't have to worry. It's safe. If you don't have to worry about fire inspections or fire department. I think I saw a situation a couple months ago where it was in the Niagara region where they had like 7 people in the house, and unfortunately some of them died, and then this owner didn't have proper fire separation and everything, and this guy's, screwed, right? Mm-hmm. You could lose insurance status. So it's just, to me, I'll always say, like, a lot of people get the permit thing kind of confused, like if they're, but electrical permit 100% every day, doesn't matter whether you're doing a building permit or not, because they don't talk. You don't have to worry about it. They're not going to raise your taxes. They're not going to come check out. But if you do any sort of electrical and you don't get a permit and something happens, you could not get coverage, right? So but I mean, on a building permit, especially structure, especially fire separation, especially that kind of stuff, it's just not worth skipping. And yes, it's going to take some time. Yes, it's going to take some money, but in the end, you don't have to worry about it.
Okay, so building permit, if you're doing any structural changes or fire separation, that type of thing, it's important to get permits. Are there any situations that you know of where you may not need a permit? Like if you're just doing flooring in a unit or something, right. That kind of thing?
Anything like for light cosmetic, you don't need permits for.
Yeah.
So the only thing, like if you're ripping out a kitchen and replacing it and it's pretty much in the same spot, you don't need to worry about it. If you have to move a sink from one side of the kitchen to the other, you still don't need a permit except for the plumbing, which is a minor thing. Mm-hmm. Doesn't cost a lot of money, doesn't take a lot of time.
Yeah.
That one I'll leave it to discretion, but it's just there's a lot of situations where you don't need permits. It's major changes to the floor plan, structure, plumbing, HVAC, that kind of thing. Yeah. Electrical always needs one unless you're just replacing lights or dividing, but that's also a completely separate organization.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so for electrical, you need permit and then also an ESA.
ESA is the permit.
Oh, ESA is the permit. Yeah, that's what you're referring to. Okay.
So ESA is the Electrical Safety Authority, and they're a completely private organization, the only organization in Canada that has the full power of law. There's actually the Electricity Act, but all other things run through your municipality.
Okay. So jumping on to this whole electrical thing, let's just say you have a duplex and then you wanted to separate the hydrometers. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that process?
Yeah, sure. So the way it works is actually to do a duplex conversion and do the hydro service is actually 3 separate permits that gets put under one property. So one for the wiring in the basement, one for the wiring in the main floor, and one for the service. And it's pretty simple. Your electrical contractor is going to take out the permits anyways. Don't take out an electrical permit for an electrical contractor because there's something wrong there. You are allowed to do your own work as a homeowner. If you're the registered, you are allowed to do your own work, but you're not allowed to hire anybody but a licensed electrical contractor.
All right, so that was a situation with the duplex. Now, if you have multiple units, you've got 4, 5, 6 units, and you've only got one hydrometer there, you're looking to separate the panels and then separate the hydrometers. From my understanding, you may have to also get the city to upgrade their voltage or something like that. The service wire.
It's the amperage, yeah. The amperage. So yeah. The size of the conductors wires coming in are based on how many amps you want to use. So the first thing you would do in a situation like that is you would request a service layout from the utility, and they'd come for a meeting with you and you tell them what you want, and they're going to tell you whether they can do that or not. Once you've done that, then you're going to pull out the permits for that.
Yeah.
It's actually relatively simple the way multi-units are set up to put multiple meters in if it's got the wires, which most of them do. It's not cheap, don't get me wrong, but it's probably well worth it. I always promote separating the meters, especially even on a duplex. People always ask that question. I would do it every single time. That way people can abuse the hydro they want. It doesn't go on your bill. Yeah. Or the liability behind it if they start growing pot or something like that. Mm-hmm. But no, 100%. Yeah, do a service layout, meet the utility company. They'll tell you exactly what they want, and you take out a permit, get your pricing, and go from there.
Yeah. So if you have to upgrade the line from the city end, yep. It's typically, I guess, depends on the municipality, but it's typically your responsibility as the homeowner, right?
Yeah. So the cost of it is your responsibility, unless you have overhead. So if you'll see the older buildings, you'll see the wires will run across from the pole. From the pole to the building is their responsibility, and they don't charge for that unless there's a big problem on the street. And from the point of attachment, which is that where it attaches to your building down in, is your responsibility. Same in residential and commercial.
But if it's underground?
Underground's a whole different ball of wax, and that can get pricey. Depends on where the property is. So sometimes they'll do the city part, but the part that's underground from your, on your property line and all that stuff, and the coordination will be your responsibility. Most of the time, the size of it is if you're leaving everything the same is going to be okay. But if you start, wanting to add air conditioners to units or that kind of stuff, that's where you're getting into an upgrade. And what would happen there is you'd be doing a service calculation, and a service calculation is going to tell you how many amps your building requires to do what you want to do. or what the modern code is. And then you would do the service layout, and then you get the pricing. So the utility is going to give you a price, and then your electrician is going to give you a price, and you're going to decide whether it's worth it. Most times it is, in my opinion. I mean, it depends what you're trying to do, but like a lot of people want that, separate utilities. It's going to make your building worth more money, and you don't have to worry about the hydro, so I would do it whenever possible.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to how much money do you have to spend and how much money are you going to save on a monthly basis. And does it make sense for you to do that? But then also when you're talking about larger units, larger buildings, then you're looking at a cap rate. So the lower your expenses, the more your building's worth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Okay. Now what about gas appliances, gas stoves in a rental property? What are your thoughts on that?
So if we're talking about an up and down duplex, which is quite common in a bungalow, I'm not a big fan of putting the gas in the basement. Sometimes what you'll see is a house cannot be upgraded beyond the 100 amp mark without a huge expense. Situation in Hamilton a few months ago for a duplex conversion, they had this thing called a T service, which is very rare, and I learned the hard way what they are. It cost me a fortune one time, but so basically you would have to dig to the underground transformer in order to upgrade this service, which we got a quote back from the utility, which was going to be like $8,000, and the investor said this isn't worth it. So what we had to do was install gas appliances. Now we had enough power to put an electric in the basement and the gas appliances upstairs, so it worked out good. If you have above ground units, I don't think it's a big deal. But the problem is most people these don't know how to use gas stoves, right? So there is a risk behind it. If you do, just make sure your carbon monoxide system and all that stuff, and maybe a little bit of training with the tenant on how to use these things. Yeah. I don't prefer to put them underground myself, but sometimes the gas appliances are your only choice.
Why do you say that about underground?
Just because you don't have as much airflow. The ceilings are typically lower. So like if someone turns the gas on, the gas is going to fill up a lot higher and faster. And I just feel like, especially the fumes in a smaller space, most of the time we're putting in relatively cheap exhaust fans in basements, and so to suck out the fumes and to make sure that the place doesn't smell bad, or you don't have to worry about a toddler hitting it or something like that. Mm-hmm. It's just an opinion piece, of course. Yeah. This is not nothing to do other, in my opinion. I just, whenever possible, I don't put gas in a basement.
Yeah. Gas is a little bit, you have to be careful, because like if you're moving the stove and you have that flex connection, you got to make sure that it's never leaking. Like you probably have to get it inspected. So yeah, okay, that's fair.
And not to mention is like if you do put them, even though we put carbon monoxide detectors in the ceiling, which beyond me why we do that, I think it's useless. Make sure you get them a plug-in one that's near the stove and sits on the floor. But carbon monoxide is a low rising gas, so it's going to start on the ground and move its way up. So that's why just make sure you have one of those.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about why somebody should hire a general contractor rather than trying to do everything themselves.
I love this question. And there's no actually real right answers. Here's my opinions on it. Is the thing is, especially if you're an investor that's trying to scale or has a full-time job or something that is more valuable with their time. The return on investment for being your own GC is relatively low if you think about it on a time basis. You can save an average of 25 to 40% by doing it yourself, but you need to invest 20 to 30 hours a week. Mm-hmm. So you really need to say, okay, if I went to work, especially if you're like a salesman or something like that, if I went to work, what could I do with that 20 to 30 hours a week? Could I make more than the 25 to 40%? Do you have the skill set? It is a skill set to be a GC, or at least you don't have to know everything that's going on. That's why you hire people. You need to know the basic process. Mm-hmm. You need to be able to coordinate people. You need to deal with very stubborn people and make them work together because we're naturally hard-headed. Yeah. I think everybody will say that's true. And you need to have the basic understanding of scheduling, when to pay things, when to have materials there. So it's just something that takes practice. I wasn't perfect at it, nor am I perfect at it now. But it takes a lot of thing to get good at it. So, but there's also, I think, a differential between the level of project. If you're just doing a facelift, like putting some floors down, maybe changing cabinets, painting, do you really need a GC for that? No, unless it's something where you're out of town or something like that. I think that's the perfect one where you could say, hire a painter, you're done. You're going to save 25 to 40%, and you don't. That's not going to cost you a lot of time. But on a 3 to 4 month project, that's a lot of hours, and it's a lot of work. So, yes, you could save, say, $20,000 to $30,000. Let's just give easy numbers. It's not precise. But you're going to invest, that's going to be a 12 to 16 week project at 20, 30 hours a week if you put everything into it. So that's where it's like, where's my return?
Right.
And you got to have, I think, the basic skill set and the know and the want to. But that's my opinion.
100%. Yeah, I agree with that. I think you brought up a good point that if you're spending your time doing other things that are going to generate you a bigger return, then just like anything else, like why would you hire a property manager? Why would you hire an electrician? Well, you have to hire an electrician, but I mean for certain things. So it makes sense to look at it and see, okay, if I can work my job and make more money than what I'm going to pay out to the GC, then
or if you're going to go find another property, example, right?
Yeah.
100%. All the most successful investors that I've worked with over the last few years, they all start with doing the things themselves, and they progressively learn to just let it go.
Yeah.
Hire a general contractor, hire a property manager, hire this, because they can do much better things with their time.
And it's also, it could be a headache to GC a project. Like you said,
it's a massive headache.
Dealing with all the different trades. Sometimes people get pissed off for whatever reason. There might be a delay here and whatever. So yeah, like sometimes it's hard to manage all these relationships and all these people that you're working with.
100%. It's a giant, to be honest with you, it's a giant babysitting job between employees, subcontractors, and everything that goes in between. And not to mention, it's a little bit of a hand-holding process for especially with newer investors. A lot of them don't really understand the process. They're very nervous. They're handing over a large sum of money. They just invested for the first time. They got this thing. They're scared crapless.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we do too is hand holding through the process and explaining is sometimes there's going to be issues. Every single project's going to have issues. Every single project's going to have some sort of change, and everything's going to have some sort of delay.
Yeah.
And it's your job to walk them through and explain that this is not the end of the world. This is how we're going to solve it, and that's where it takes practice.
And one other thing on this topic, so when you are GCing something yourself, if you're new to it, you're probably going to make mistakes in the sense that you're not going to hire people in the right order.
Sure.
So you might hire the painter last, which may not be the most efficient way to do it because all the cabinets are in. They're going to have to cover all the floors and whatever else. Same with HVAC. If you're running your vents, they got to get it when the property's open and all the walls are open, whatever else, right? So just some things that you learn along the way. But
absolutely. And you're going to screw up the first one. You're probably going to screw up the second one. But if you're interested, then do it the third one. You'll be better.
Yeah.
I mean, we try to get better every time we do one, and same with thing would happen if you start doing it yourself. You will make mistakes that will cost you money, but you'll learn, and then that's what we do.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's move on. I've kind of touched on this a couple times, but I'm curious to know your opinion. Underpinning, kind of the general process here and what it would typically cost. I don't know if it's by linear foot or how it's typically charged.
Yeah, so underpinning I get asked about a lot, and the problem is it's not cheap, and it's never going to be cheap. It is a big, ugly, nasty job. I've been a part of them. So a lot of times it really depends on the potential uplift to your property. So I've seen it done in Toronto where it made sense 100%. It took a property from single family to a duplex in Toronto, made sense. Where I see it in Hamilton where it's not even close to worth it. That was, 40, 60, 80,000, depending on the side of the house, and not to mention the permitting time and the engineering that goes into it, depending on the size. And yes, it would be done by the linear foot. Do I know exactly? No. I mean, there's other situations too where I did one in Niagara in the Lake with my uncle that he actually lifted the house, and so he framed the house onto the existing foundation by adding another 4 feet. That was an option, and there's lots of things.
Is that cheaper?
I think it was a little bit cheaper, and it was just a lot faster. It was a pretty interesting process. So they bring in the cranes, they lift the house onto beams, and they build new walls and drop it on. So that depends on what the house allows and the soil. And I'm not an expert on the process, but the engineering is really going to determine that and how much space you have. Can you actually get something in between the two houses? So if anybody doesn't know what underpinning is they're basically going to smash out your existing basement floor. And underneath the outside walls, there's a thing called a footing. And a footing is on undisturbed soil, and it basically supports all the way to the house. So if you accidentally dig underneath that footing without re-supporting the footing, that's how your house falls down.
Yeah.
Because it's basically got nowhere to support to. So underpinning is basically going underneath your existing footings and adding new footings, which allows you to go down deeper. and it's really cool process. But it's backbreaking. It's dirty because you're basically smashing out a concrete floor, digging out the concrete
All
floor.
hand digging, right?
Hand digging.
Yeah.
You're not getting machines down there and taking out all the dirt, and then re-pouring all the concrete. So that's why it's expensive. It's extremely labor intensive. But my opinion on it is if the dollars make sense that you can now turn a house from a single family to a duplex, or a duplex to a triplex, or that kind of thing, and the dollars make sense, 100%. Most times it depends on area. Like Hamilton and Niagara typically don't make financial sense to do it.
Well, it could have made sense if you bought a property 2-3 years ago.
yeah. If you knew what was going to happen, that's a different conversation. But yes, I agree with you.
Yeah. Now, what about bench footing?
Bench footing, I actually have that in my house. And bench footing is basically allowing you to, you lose floor space. So basically what the bench footing is you're going to go inside of the footing, go down and make a new one so it supports against the side. The only downside to it is that you're losing square footage, but I think it is definitely cheaper. I'm sure how much cheaper because I've never been part of that process, but if you have the space to lose, it's a good idea because you don't have to go underneath the existing footings, right? So
yeah, I think typically they say that for every foot you want to go down, you're losing a foot of wall space, roughly.
Makes sense.
Right? Yeah. So, okay, so that's that underpinning versus bench footing. Let's talk a little bit about price of materials and labor lately. So we've seen inflation. Obviously, that's been a factor in many ways, and that's impacted the construction industry as well.
Yeah, so COVID really put the construction industry under stress because we were not typically good planners as an industry as a whole. So no one knew that when COVID first hit, we all thought we were going to go out of business, right? And then end up being the busiest time in construction's history by permit values, by dollar values, by material values. No one was prepared for it. So I'm part of some groups all over the States and Canada, like some contractor masterminds with some pretty high-level people, and listening to them. So like prices for material, like on roofing from 2 years ago, has doubled. Like, I mean, you look at 2x4s, which is the easy Canadian example. We saw them hit $14 from $2 and then back down to $4 and back up to $12 in the last couple of weeks. And so, I mean, that's a good example. On a typical basement suite, you need 300 2x4s. Well, that's 4 times the cost just for lumber. Mm-hmm. Electrical, I was almost shocked today when I found out a steel box that was typically $4 is now $18. A coil of wire that was $99 is now $300. So it's driving up prices like crazy, and the material shortages are still here. They're not brutal, don't get me wrong. We can get anything. Some just takes time. But container shipping from China has, 20 times the price. So, a kitchen that I used to be able to get for $12,000 is now $24,000 and all that stuff. So that all gets passed on to the customer. And not to mention a margin on top of that for the contractor. And so it's a scary experience, but now subcontractors were never busier, so that means they drove their prices up, and they were hard to get. Labor has never been more expensive. People are demanding rates for, skilled people. They're asking $25 with no experience.
Because they're busy.
Because they're busy, so you have no choice,
yeah.
Right? Now, that's gonna change, in my opinion. So all that has driven the contractors, GCs, builders to have to drive up their prices drastically, which has, of course, been affected to the investor. And the problem is with housing pricing driving up, contractors driving up, it's just been a nasty period to try to judge. And unfortunately, we've seen property values match that, so that's okay. But what's about to happen is now that the interest rates are rising and the COVID's coming to an end, hopefully, and it's appears to be. So that means people are going to start traveling more. They're not going to be focused so much on fixing up their houses, which is going to really create a winter in the contracting industry, so that there's going to be more subcontractors and contractors available. And that's going to drive down pricing naturally. It's going to cause a lot of contractors to get desperate really quick. Mm-hmm. So that's where I want you guys to all be careful, because desperate people are never good things.
Right.
But so it's going to be a really interesting period. But I do expect contractor pricing to come down slowly over the next couple of years. But I don't expect material pricing to go down.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, we don't know what's going to happen with that. But that made me think of something actually pretty important because I guess when you're hiring a contractor as a customer, as a consumer, what should you look out for? Because typically a contractor will provide you with their contract, but that may not be necessarily in your best interest. So I know you're on the contracting side,
Yeah.
but
No, that's fine. I'll tell you the fair side is
yeah.
like, it's got to be beneficial to both parties. So that's why, like, any legal contract should be checked by a legal person, right? So the most contractors aren't going to have a great ironclad legal contract because they're not going to spend the money on a lawyer, right?
Mhm.
So I would say if you're going to be provided a contract that's any significant over maybe over $2,500, I'd say it's definitely worth a paralegal or a lawyer looking at it and making sure that you're not going to somehow get trapped into something. But what you need to see on a contract or like I call them an estimate proposal, whatever you want to call them. There should be a clear scope of work, and when I say clear scope of work, writing down new flooring throughout I wouldn't call a scope of work. I say it should specify the material. It should specify if there's any subfloors to be repaired. Is there an allowance behind it? An allowance is basically how much a material could be. Because if I just put down supply a new vinyl floor, well, you could say I want that $8 square foot vinyl floor, and I was thinking the $2 stuff. Well, that's how the fights start, right? Mm-hmm. So I've learned over the years, because I hate typing this up any more than any human being alive, but now it takes. I used to be able to do this in 15, 20 minutes because you're just throwing down, okay, new floor, new kitchen. Well, then you realize you got to specify what type, how much, how many square foot, all that stuff. So it protects me, and it should protect you, because think of Grow Rich, it's like any deal should be beneficial to both sides, right? Because it's not worth the headache. It's not worth the fight. And we've all been through them, disagreements. But so a clear scope of work should be on a contract. Obviously, both parties, dates, allowances, contract language. So, payment schedule is very important.
Yep.
Very, very important. And make sure as a consumer you stick to it. If a contractor asks you to bump or to break the payment schedule, start getting a little bit concerned. And be very careful, because if that guy's having problems, which a lot of them do, I can speak on that subject for 3 hours because most have no idea what they're doing. And I could go on that subject for an hour, but I'll give you a quick rundown. Is most contractors have no idea what their break-even expense is for a year, which is basically all their back-end cost, and because no one thinks about it. They see how much it's going to cost and how much profit. Oh, I'm going to put 20% on when it's costing them 25% to open the business. Most people you got to be real careful. You see them start breaking the payments or start asking for things up front, because that means there's a cash flow issue.
Yeah. And
the moment you start handing over more cash than what the allowance is, all of a sudden we're going to get to the end and there's only going to be 3 or 4% left, and there's 20% of the work to do. What do you think is going to happen? Yeah. So that's why you want to make sure that the deposit and the payment schedule seems to be fair and even. That way you don't run into a problem at the end. Mm-hmm. And contract language on how change orders are handed over, how disagreements are handled, all that stuff needs to be in this written contract. A price on the back of a business card is not good enough.
Yeah, for sure. What about timelines?
Timelines actually are a good thing to be on there too. That's something there should be an agreement on relatively when the start date is, which can be flexible based on permits and stuff like that, and how long the project should take. Is there any sort of penalties? Now you got to be careful, fair with that one too. We actually put a thing in our business that's called a timeline guarantee. So once we've done our plan, we'll guarantee a finish date. And if we miss that finish date, other than you've made a change, then we cover the lost month's rent for the next month. Mm. But the change orders, for example, if you request an upgrade or a change, that's going to extend a timeline. You got to be fair with that one.
Yeah.
But that definitely should be on your agreement.
Okay. I guess another thing that you have to factor in as a contractor or as someone running a business is gas prices, because if you're like based out of Hamilton, like you said, and now you're working in St. Catharines, there's gas at play here.
But even working in Hamilton, work vans and work trucks are getting 10 miles a gallon, right? So, yeah, 100%. But this is just the thing in general, right? With the inflation going the way it is, and every single thing is costing more money, and it all eventually comes back to the consumer. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things like, a lot of people ask, what's this going to cost? I'm like, well, there's a lot of things that go into it, but gas prices aren't helping. I've actually dropped a lot of my fleet and changed things because of gas prices. And like at one point I was paying $35,000 a year for auto insurance.
35,000. Oh,
yeah,
between
because of all the trucks,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it's like it's you got to be very careful on the balance. But yes, fuel prices, insurance, materials, even office supplies is something that it's a very delicate balance of overhead in a company, and it's one of those things that takes time to learn.
Yeah.
Like I don't mind sharing. Like my overhead thing right now is sitting at $1.2 million, so I have to make $2.2 million in profit just to stay open for a year.
For a year, yeah.
For a year now, that's all relative
Yeah.
to an income, which is ours was about $5 million last year, so it's about a 25% overhead.
Mm-hmm.
But so you got to do a heck of a lot of work, and to do that, and that money, it sounds like that's a lot of money. Well, it is, but I mean, if you don't have the right staff, if you don't have the right tools, if you don't have the right equipment, the right trucks, then that's how all the problems that contractors are famous for happen.
Yeah.
So it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. And so like I chose to spend it in a certain way. Now I'd love to spend more, but the problem is that every dollar that I spend is more you have to charge the customer. So it's a very delicate balance on how much overhead you can have and still be able to make some money doing it.
Sure. I bet you 90 or more % of contractors don't know the numbers you just shared.
Actually, there's a study. So everybody heard of the book, The EMyth?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a Contractors version.
Oh, really?
Wrote by the same guy.
Yeah.
And so 95% of contractors fail in the first year, and 95% of them fail in the next 10 years. And that's because they don't know this number. So I've spent in the last year $250,000 on programs. And so the first one I joined was a group called Profit for Contractors out of Ottawa. And they taught, the first day I was in the thing, they taught me a lesson on how to price jobs that almost made me want to blow my head off because I knew what I quickly screwed up for the last 2 years. And then you learn systems and how to treat customers and all that stuff. But contractors typically don't do math, right? And I didn't know for the first years. My electrical business in the beginning was disastrous. I had no idea. And if you went up to 90% of the contractors, I actually encourage everybody to do this just for fun, and go ask them what their break-even point. They will have no clue.
Mm-hmm.
And most don't. Like I've taught it. Like I usually get a lot of the young guys in and teach them classes just on that one subject alone.
Yeah.
Because at least that way they know what they're doing, right? It's going to be a long, drawn-out process to build a company. I got a long way to go for what I want to do. But that number is everything. Because if you don't charge at least that number on top of what it's going to cost you, you're going to be bankrupt in a year.
Yeah, and that's also, like, obviously it's bad in that situation, but it also leads to a bad relationship with your clients if you're constantly going to them and saying, hey, I miscalculated.
Yeah,
I need more money.
I refuse.
Yeah.
If I screw up, I screw up. Here's an example. My project manager came to me and said, hey, you put down $20 instead of $2,000 for mudding at the customer's house. I'm like, well, that was stupid, wasn't it? But I'm not going after him for that. That was my screw up. It wasn't his.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I present a price for what I told him I'd do, that's the fixed price, and that's something I'll stick to for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if they ask for something, they're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
But for what I told them I'd do for this price is what they do, and it happens too much, right? And this is where I always say, well, there's the warning signs when you start seeing 50 times where they're coming to you for more money because of this and this. Well, there's a problem with the scope of work.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I would say when you're going to get 2 or 3 quotes, you got to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. The scope of work is what matters.
Yeah.
So if the guy's going to quote you a demo at $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, okay, so you got to read. Don't worry about the numbers yet. Read what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And if all 3 are the same, go with the 5,000.
Yeah. Yeah. What are your thoughts on trades that will basically just charge you as they go? Like you might get a quote up front and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, we discovered we need to do this. So then they just start charging you as they go.
It's it takes experience, first of all, and it takes a strong will because, like, for me, it's not hard because I was in it, so I can go say, that's not a chance I'm paying you more for that. You knew better than that, right? But for an average customer or for a young, like my project manager had to learn how to deal with it. It's something that, okay, you want a fixed price except for crazy unforeseens. Well, what is unforeseen when you've done this job 100 times?
Yeah.
Now, you might find something's leaking that we didn't plan. Okay, so it's a minor change order, right? But you got to be super careful with time and material prices, and it's called cost plus. because there's no guarantee.
Mm-hmm.
So cost plus and time and material, it's almost the same. But time and material is basically, okay, I'm going to charge you $90 an hour plus material. Is there a markup? They got to tell you up front. For every hour I'm here, there's no limits. Cost plus is, okay, sometimes you'll put a do not exceed clause in. Okay, you can't go over $1,500 without getting permission. But I'm charging you this much an hour plus material at 30% markup, and we'll let you know. Hopefully, it comes in under. So there's risk to it.
Mm-hmm.
Fixed price is always going to be better, unless it's a service call.
Yeah.
If your drain's backed up, you're not going to get a fixed price. That's a time and material, and that's something you got to accept. But whenever possible, 9 times out of 10, you want fixed price contracting, and you want to have the discussion. What's the potential for extras, right?
Yeah. Okay, so maybe can we just kind of break down, let's say you have a multi-unit building. Let's say you have a fourplex.
Yep.
And you're renovating the entire building. What can you sort of expect to pay per unit if you're rewiring and then putting new plumbing in? I know this is a broad question.
Yeah, it's a broad question, but
let's just say you're doing all new wiring in the entire unit. What can you expect to pay for like a 1-bedroom unit?
Sure.
And then plumbing also if you're maybe adding a dishwasher and then cleaning up all the old plumbing.
Yeah, sure. Electrical, I think if you're going to start from scratch and rebuild, you're probably going to see somewhere between $5,000 and $8,000, depending on the size of the unit and the condition, and whether you need a panel and whether you need the Somes on wiring. Plumbing, I think you're going to probably be like from redoing the plumbing and fixing up, probably close to the same range, depending on how. See, the nice thing about multifamily business, they use these thing called wet walls, and it runs from top to bottom. Plumbing's in the exact same spot, so you know how to fix it easy, right? So what you want to do is I mean, I would start off with a great video or photo package before you start bringing in contractors, and send them a walkthrough video and photos, and just say, hey, would you mind ballparking that? That way, if you get one guy that comes in at $5,000, one guy that comes in $20,000, one guy in the middle, well, you're going to talk to the two guys in the middle. So I'm a big fan of, even though we don't like virtual things that much anymore because we're sick of them, I'm a big fan of virtual estimates right now, so it doesn't waste your time to drive from here to Niagara, and it doesn't waste the plumber's time. So then getting a ballpark. But yeah, so wiring prices have gone up so much, and I'm, believe it or not, I'm a little bit out of the loop because I've been focused on the contracting business for so long.
Yeah.
But that's where I'm going to guess if you're going to replace it all, you're going to be at somewhere in that range.
$5,000 to $8,000 for electrical.
Yeah. Electrical.
Okay. What about plumbing?
Plumbing, you're talking a new tub, or you're talking new stacks, new water lines, or you're just talking about them.
Let's say all of it.
Yeah. So if you're going to rough in the brand new from, I think you're going to be probably in the same range.
Yeah. Okay.
I think if you're talking, most of these buildings, like 4 and 6 units, they're not really more than like 1950s, 1960s old.
Yep.
So a lot of the time, the main parts of the components, like the stack and the drains, are reusable. So really, at that point, you're going to drop your price quite a bit because really, you're just going to replace a tub, and you're going to redo the valve, and you're going to put a new shower in. You're gonna
unless the previous owner did a lot of DIY stuff.
Yeah, well, that's different. Yeah. Yes. But I mean, so that's the thing is, like, buildings like this, the multi-units are actually quite nice because they were actually kind of well designed. Bungalows were not. I mean, they're great little homes, but the worst part about them is the mechanical trades.
Yeah.
It's like kind of like the multis, they kind of mimicked like how they do high rises. They do wet walls, so you got it from start to finish. It was so great we were doing an 8-unit multi. I was doing electrical, putting smoke detectors in. I could fish from the attic all the way down to the basement during the wet wall and pull all the wire. It was awesome. Cool. So those are designed well enough so you can keep the cost down on those, especially the more units you have, you can do kind of economies of scale, especially on just what do you call facelifting. If you're not gutting and rebuilding the places, you could save a lot of money by doing economies of scale. Okay, you're getting everything at a little bit of a discount because you're buying more. If the guys are there, you're going to save a discount because they don't go back and forth. So that's, whenever possible, do that.
Okay. So we touched on electrical, plumbing. What about overall, if you just wanted to ballpark a 1-bedroom unit, let's say 600 square feet, what can you kind of expect?
Like a facelift?
If you're... Well, by facelift, you mean not removing the drywall?
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking. Or are you thinking from start to finish?
Yeah, let's say you're doing, like, you're taking out all the drywall, rewiring, doing the plumbing, doing everything.
I would guess probably, so we're going to gut the place and rebuild it?
Yeah.
I'm going to guess between 60 and 100 a unit, depending on size and depending on what you want to do to it.
Yeah. Okay.
I wasn't prepared for that question.
No, I mean, it makes sense because, like you said, maybe a couple years ago, this number would have been a lot lower.
It would have been
But
different, yeah.
the way things are right now, it's definitely more expensive.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that. What else can we touch on? I think we covered a lot of stuff here. Was there anything else you feel like we should touch on?
No, I think I think as over the next couple of years, you got to be really careful with contractors. I love contractors, by the way. I love the business, but it's a nasty business, and there's got zero barrier to entry. Like literally, I was an electrician one day. I decided I was going to be a contractor, and I was the next day. There's no licensing unless you're in a couple cities.
Yeah.
There's no specific insurance requirements other than general liability, and so people that go after the cheapest ones usually run into problems. Now, I'm not saying pay the most. I'm saying do your homework.
Mm-hmm.
Doing your lack of due diligence with a contractor, I think, is like a death sentence, but it doesn't mean you have to overpay. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is do your due diligence, make sure that they're going to do what you want first before you worry about the money, and just be super careful the next couple of years, because I do believe you're going to see desperation hit, and material prices are going to stay up. So, and I mean, with the prices going there is, just be careful, do your due diligence, and make sure you're really comfortable with the person before you move on.
Yeah. Well, I guess, what do you think people should do to make sure that they're picking the right person? Do you think they should check Google reviews? Where home stars? Like where do people go to?
Personally, I mean, especially because we're talking about investors, I think investors have one of the best networks there is. Like, it's unbelievable, right? Between the Facebook groups and Instagram and just general networking groups like the Right Club and Rockstar and all those, they get together. Just by talking to those people, you're going to find hundreds and hundreds of good contractors, right? Yeah. So I would start with that. And then once you've got a few referrals, then I would start looking at the Google reviews, which can be fudged. So you got to be a little bit careful. Mm-hmm. And then, actually have an interview with them, making sure that, they're going to do what you want, what their paperwork process is like, and what their contract's like, and make sure you're going to work well together. Yeah. And if you do that, then you should be in pretty good shape. But going to Kijiji and asking, and actually I should put this is my favorite saying in the whole world. Please do not go on Facebook and ask for a cheap contractor. You will get because every single time that happens, and all of a sudden you're seeing the same guys talking about them getting screwed. Ask for a good contractors, and then worry about the price, right? I think if you focus on quality and reliable is number one, obviously. Talk to the people in your networks, and then if you get good referrals from them, then go with them. Even if they're a tiny bit more money, but you're going to get a sure commodity, I think you're going to be better off. Whether somebody else screws you and you have to pay someone to do it again, I think it's going to be a lot cheaper in the long run. Yeah. Most of the time, I find investors value time just as much as they value money. So imagine doing something twice how long it's going to take, even if you had to pay a little bit more on the front. So that's kind of my opinion on that one.
I guess there's different levels of investors. There are investors that have a full-time job and they might have one property, and then there are investors that this is what they do. They're constantly looking for deals and growing their portfolio and whatever else.
And the thing is, it's an experience level too, because most of the experienced investors, they know what they're doing, right? They're experienced because they've had experience. If you're in the beginning, like a lot of the things we do is education with a lot of the newer investors. We have to walk them through the processes and tell them what the best things, like a lot of people like to focus on the pretty stuff. Like, I want quartz countertops, but their furnace is falling apart. And you try to explain to them, okay, we can do your furnace now. You can do your quartz countertops anytime. It's going to be this price. But if you skip your furnace now and you do the quartz countertops, and once I finish this place and you have to replace it, it's going to cost you double. Yeah. So trying to teach them that, wiring, plumbing, mechanical. So a lot of the stuff we do is with younger, newer investors. And that seems to be a better fit for us, because the senior guys don't really need our expertise. They know what they're doing, right? Yeah. I mean, it doesn't mean that we don't work with senior people, but it's just we seem to fit in better with the newer ones. They're a little bit on the needy side, which is fine. That's what we're kind of here for. But you just want to, once they're senior investors, they're going to have a Rolodex of contractors. They're going to have the ones they trust. They're going to have the ones they deal. So that's how I kind of see that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, thank you for sharing all that. I know I caught you off guard with some of the questions.
That's all right.
Yeah, thanks for coming by today. Would you want to tell people how they can reach you?
Sure.
And we'll include that in the show notes.
So our website's blackjackcontractinginc.ca, and we're at Blackjack Contracting Inc. on all the socials. And I'm at Jon Tenbrinke or at REI Contractor on Instagram, and feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Jon, thanks a lot for coming by.
Problem.
Appreciate you sharing all this stuff, and I hope it's going to benefit some of the listeners, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Your support is truly appreciated. And if you can share this with a friend or family member that might benefit from the information, remember our goal is to motivate and inspire others to take action and to build wealth and to become well off. Enjoy the rest of your day.